Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Quigley. You and I had a nice, probably hour and a half conversation maybe a month ago as an introduction. You're new to the department, and I'm new to this committee. We both have a great deal to learn. One of the most important aspects of what the department does deals with the areas of regulation and rulemaking, and I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about process. Because it is a bit different for environmental regulations than it is generally in the state, because there's some other players involved. And so for the understanding of those with us today and those who are interested and may catch this at another time, I just wanted to walk through the process and using as an example Chapter 78 and Chapter 78A. Which is a new chapter is entitled 25 that deal with gas drilling for conventional wells and unconventional wells. At where we are in the process, as I understand it, is that earlier this week on Monday, mid-morning, these documents marked draft were presented on the website of the department.
Correct.
And there was a webinar that had started sometime earlier with the media, but I understand that those who were not credentialed media were not allowed to ask questions. Was that correct?
That is correct. The intention of the webinar was to announce the release of the document and the next step in the regulatory process. We accepted questions from credentialed media, but we had over 130 participants on the call. And
so the next step at this point is that this document is on the agenda for the March 20th meeting of the Technical Advisory Board on Oil and Gas.
Correct.
That agenda indicates that there's going to be 15 minutes for public comment. This is a subject that received over 24,000 public comments when it was put forth originally. Do you think 15 minutes is going to be sufficient?
Well, that's 15 minutes at that particular meeting, Representative. There is going to be I believe it's a 30-day, additional 30-day public comment period. So we have actually gone above and beyond our normal procedures in terms of allowing for the maximum amount of public comment and stakeholder engagement.
All right. So at this TAB meeting, the website lists members of the TAB, 5 people. Mr. Watson, Fragel, Schlegel, Waite, and Yingling. Are they the members of the TAB?
I'm going to look at Deputy Secretary Ongst. I haven't seen the list, frankly, because those appointments ran through the Oil and Gas Deputate.
Those are the members of the TAB as it existed prior to the decision to try to create a new advisory committee for the conventionals only. So those are the 5 names that are officially listed as TAB.
So they are currently members of the TAB. They are the people who are invited to the meeting next week on the 20th.
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. So they have not been replaced.
To my knowledge, but we will have to get back to you on that to make sure.
Well, the grapevine has reported that they've all been contacted some time ago and alerted that they'd been relieved of their responsibilities. So my question is that in terms of this administrative rulemaking process of sending information to the TAB, this meeting happens in 9 days. Do we have clarity who it even would be that the public could be in touch with, or who it is you would be sending the material to so that they would have adequate time to prepare for this rather important meeting on March 20th?
There are appointment letters that have already been sent out for new members of the TAB, and I am not familiar with the individuals involved. The new members of the TAB will be convening for the March 30th meeting.
March 20th.
The March 20th meeting.
But do they know who they are?
Yes, they do.
But we don't know who they are.
We actually have in draft, because I saw it just yesterday, a release listing the names. So that information will be made public in very short order. And certainly prior to the meeting.
Well, let's just move on from that. You mentioned, and we talked about that you're going to republish the revised regulations in Pennsylvania Bulletin. The grapevine says that's going to be on April 4th. Is that consistent with your expectations?
I'm not sure what grapevine you're referring to, Representative.
Well, I'm not getting a lot of direct information. So my question is, when do you intend to publish in the Pennsylvania Bulletin?
I don't have the date. I would have to get that back to you.
Nobody knows the date? Anybody? Bueller?
Representative, that would depend on what happens at the TAB meeting. The TAB exists to provide technical advice to the department. Depending on what that advice may be, there may be some additional changes that would be recommended for the draft or for the proposed regulation. It may take a week or two, to make those changes. So that April 4th date may not be set in stone, but it would be soon after the TAB meeting.
All right. But coming back to this TAB meeting, have these unnamed members of the TAB been alerted that, A, there's a meeting on March 20th, and have they been provided the drafts?
As far as I know, yes.
But you don't know who they are.
I personally don't know who they
So
are.
who handles this kind of
The
thing? I mean,
oil
who are you
and gas-
mailing these things to?
Oil and gas deputate handles the correspondence.
All right. Now, is it safe to say then that since at least the beginning of the year, that the TAB has not been involved with formulating this draft?
Well, Representative, I came in the office on January 20th, so I can only speak to what has happened since that
Sure,
time.
since January 20th.
No, the TAB has not been involved in the development of the final version of the draft. It's appropriate for them to receive that at this point in the process.
Has the EQB been involved since January 20th in formulating the draft?
No.
All right. Now, last week, you and I had a conversation that led to a follow-up phone call where I had been under the expectation that before this draft was going to be made public, that there was going to be opportunities for us to have informal conversations about the nature and extent of what's presented here. And on Thursday, you mentioned to me in a voicemail that you were precluded from doing so. Since then, I've checked, and I find no statutory or regulatory obstacle to you and I having such conversations. So I am expecting that when you say you're unable to do that, you're unable to do it because of some decision of this administration. And my question is that your decision? Is it the governor's decision?
Well, Representative, you're unfairly and inaccurately characterizing the conversation.
I can play your voicemail if you
Wait,
wish.
I'm sure you probably could. What you asked me in the rotunda that afternoon was, could you have a copy of the draft regulations? And I checked, and they were still literally being worked on.
As of, that was March 2nd, 3rd, and on March 5th, you did say they were still tweaking them. So even if you were able to provide them, you didn't have them.
But what I did say to you is I would have been happy to have a conversation about the nature of, and that's what we talked about in your office, the nature of what we are looking at. But in terms of handing you a document, I couldn't do that because it wasn't finished.
All right. Now, can you explain the significance of the date on this draft that was released on Monday? It's dated February 13th.
I don't have the document in front of me.
You can have this copy.
Well, I don't know the source of this.
That's your website.
What I can tell you is, as of the end of last week, we were still doing some final revisions, final edits.
Well, then the question arises, is the most up-to-date draft the one which has been presented to the public? Because this one is dated February 13th. There doesn't seem to be any knowledge on your part as to why this would say February 13th if you thought it was still being tweaked as of March 5th. I would appreciate some follow-up as to whether or not this is, in fact, the document.
Certainly.
Because that's the document that's in the public.
I'll be happy to double check that for you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to conclude my inquiries about process. I will say that, in my view, this regulatory and rulemaking undertaking of the department is one of the most important jobs you have. And you've talked many times about integrity and transparency, and I am a great fan of both. What I've seen in this case doesn't exhibit either. We have a committee that's to meet on short notice about a voluminous document, and we don't even know who the committee members are. We have a document that's presented that may or may not actually be the document, and so on and so on. We have the EQB and TAB not involved in formulating this draft. These seem to me to be very great matters of concern, and I would urge you, as you go forward here and go forward with the other rulemakings that will lie ahead, that there is a better attention to the integrity and transparency. Thank you, Mr. Chair.